My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
And my name is Pixel Patch. I'm a joyful geek with an expertise in gaming, both tabletop and video.
Our mission is to bring nerd culture to the masses.
And by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast. Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd culture under the microscope.
All of it. Every truckload of nerd culture we have shipped to us directly here at the Nerd Culture Lab, and we put it under the microscope.
No, this is the Bat Jar studio. It's like a cave, remember?
I thought we weren't supposed to tell people about the location of the lab. Yep, okay, wow. We are at the Bat Jar. Yep.
We'll just edit this part out.
That's fine. No one will know. No one will know what
That's
we
like
did.
podcast lingo for... We're just going to leave it in, and then it'll become a joke.
Yeah, I like that. yeah, cut the mic. We'll edit it in post.
Anyway, you might hear occasional jingling going on here. I'm wearing an elf hat that has like 10 bells on it, so sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, yeah, I think it'll work out.
This is our last episode before Christmas, so we're really getting into the mood.
I've got myself a big fluffy hat on, so if my voice sounds muffled, I'm going to blame my hat.
Yeah,
that's how that works.
Seems logical.
Yeah.
Our last episode before Christmas this year is really like a gift to ourselves because Sony released a new movie this week, and I received it as an early Christmas present.
Because it was a visual feast. It filled the stomach of my mind's eye with joy.
Today's episode is all about the new film Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
And oh why, it's a nice start. It's a great start.
Like all things that we discussed in this show, we have to talk about how we got to here.
Mm-hmm.
Pixel Patch, you've probably mentioned on the show before how you first encountered the Spider-Man character. But
Yeah. In our discussion of Stan Lee, the 90s Spider-Man was just my go-to, and it already was rife with like crossovers and like great character moments. Definitely one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, and that's something we share in common because that too was my first exposure to Spider-Man.
Oh, nice. Not the 60s one? You didn't grow up with that?
No, I don't know how old you think I am.
I mean,
I have watched a lot of the 67 animated series, but that was when I was older and had already finished, watching Spider-Man 90s.
Right.
But this is interesting because the 90s animated series is also where I was introduced to the idea of the Spider-Verse.
Right.
The idea that there could potentially be multiple versions of Spider-Man because you probably know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
so
they always bring in, now talking about based on the movie or based on the original cartoon?
I'm talking,
Oh, no, okay, we're not going into that yet.
No, you use the word cartoon to describe an animated series.
An animated series. I have wronged you. I'm going to go beat myself for like 5 minutes with like flagellation. All in preparation for the holiday spirit, but yes.
Right, this will be edited so that those 5 minutes you won't even know they've gone by.
And I'm back. All right, wow, I am hurt, but I'm contrite.
Now, what I'm alluding to is that in the very last couple episodes of the 90s animated series, we meet Spider-Man from alternate realities.
They have a crossover where the Fantastic Four and a whole bunch of heroes from Earth
after that
are sent in, and then at the end when they defeat him, when
Madam
Web, there you go. Madam Web introduces Spider-Man to the like multiple spider people of the Spider-Verse.
Am I going mad? This is the one that's supposed to be our leader? Give me a break. I should be in charge of this group. I'm the real Spider-Man.
I don't know what kind of mind game this is, but I'm the real Spider-Man.
The real Peter Parker. Guess again.
See? Pete, old buddy, we're just as genuine as you are. But how can that be?
Madam Web says that we're each from different dimensions.
Reality is like a river that splits off into many parallel tributaries. These Spider-Men are from parallel realities, each as legitimate as yours. They're all you, with some slight differences.
It's impressive.
So as a child, I knew who Spider-Man was, and now they're telling me that there are more than one Spider-Men.
Yeah, Spider-Men.
And I thought it was a cool idea because basically what they present in that show are Spider-Men from different worlds that are, in that case, all different variations of Peter Parker.
Yeah.
In fact, they all sound the same, too. It's kind of distracting to like hear the one guy basically talk in a bunch of different voices. But
And it's really interesting because this was before a lot of the modern narrative of like multiple timelines and stuff like that. Like time travel had been talked about in sci-fi and stuff, but this one really with like choices that you make in the past creating multiple existing futures is really, really interesting.
Well, in animation for sure, but it had been part of comic books for a long time at that point.
Okay.
Like in the mid-1980s, DC Comics literally had to do an event called Crisis on Infinite Earths because so many different Earths had been introduced that it was confusing for comic book readers. So they used that as a way to basically reboot their whole
multiverse.
We're
rebooting the multiverse. It's fine. It'll be okay.
But seriously, and Marvel has had they had a comic book series for a long time called What If.
Right.
And basically if you're familiar with this, but every issue essentially told an alternate telling of a story.
I did remember that. Yeah, you might have mentioned in a previous podcast, perhaps.
Maybe.
I mean, it's not unpossible. Wow.
But regardless of the fact that there's the idea of alternate realities being explored in comic books had been around for a long time before that. Mm-hmm. For you and I, growing up in the 90s, that episode of the Spider-Man series
was just mind-blowing.
Was like the first time we'd ever seen anything like that.
Yeah.
The earliest example I can find of a comic book story that is intentionally set in another world or a retelling of a character, it's a story called Gotham by Gaslight.
Okay.
And essentially it's a retelling of Batman's story where it's set during the era of like Jack the Ripper.
Oh, interesting.
So Bruce Wayne and all those characters that we know from like modern day Gotham City live in like the 1800s.
Wow. That's really, really... See, I thought from what you said with Gaslight, it was going to be over for 1920s, but that's ridiculous because Gaslight is an 1800s thing. Man, I'm way off with my inventions. What, the trains come out in the 1500s, right? They had trains then?
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
There's probably a parallel Earth where that happened.
Yeah, just early train adoption and nothing else.
So what do you think about this whole idea, before we get into anything else, this whole idea of parallel Earths? Is it just confusing to you? Is it interesting?
Here's the thing. I find it's like, I am not a fan of reboots. Like, I'm not a big fan of modern reboots of a lot of stories, but I am a big fan of alternate universe. And I don't know why. Like, it is okay, reboot is just rehashing the same thing, and I guess that's why it bothers me. But alternate realities is a ton of fun. Like, it's just, I love hypotheticals. So I guess that's why it really like strikes me. I was like, oh yeah, this is nice. I like that. How about you?
Well, it's an interesting concept, and it seems to be there's certain characters like Spider-Man and Batman where I don't know what it is about them, maybe because they're popular, because they have a unique visual style, or they have a compelling story. Mm-hmm. But it seems as though as comic books have developed over the last 70, 80, 90 years, mm-hmm. writers and artists are drawn to those characters and the idea of exploring alternate takes on the story.
Mm-hmm. Like the characters have a strong visual presence, and then it's easy to marry those with other strong visual presence. Like the not as popular feudal take on Batman, it's like feudal Japan has a strong visual presence. Like, you know what samurai armor looks like, and then you know what Batman looks like. So mixing them both just creates... I read an article where they said, Overwatch is a very successful first-person shooter because it creates a strong visual narrative. So I think the reason that crossovers are so popular is because they create strong visual narratives that people can latch onto and change.
That's a good point. It's been a thing with Spider-Man that essentially throughout his history they have gone to the trouble of creating essentially alternate versions of his story. And I'm not just talking about like the Clone Saga where they actually introduced like literally literal clones of Spider-Man, but telling alternate versions, telling stories about different sets of circumstances or people in different time periods becoming Spider-Man, or even just different people taking the role of Peter Parker in the story. And where that really became a thing for me, there was a video game that came out in 2010 called Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions.
Oh, for which system?
It was like PS3, Xbox 360.
Okay.
But the whole gimmick of the game is that you played through different levels as one of 4 different Spider-Men.
Oh, so you if you fail as one, you're just like, okay, I need this Spider-Man's abilities to tackle this kind of thing.
Well, it's basically... The idea is that you essentially you play through that level as that character, so you're in those worlds as that character. So
okay.
So there's a level where you're Spider-Man 2099. It's a comic book that was published in the 1990s about the far future of 2099.
Which is only, what, like 70 years away now?
Yeah.
Youch.
But everything's super sci-fi, and there's like, cars flying everywhere, kind of like Star Wars. So it's like a completely different environment. And then they had Spider-Man Noir, which is set in the 1930s, and they emphasized kind of like the Arkham games, where that was all about stealth because that Spider-Man wasn't as powerful, and it was all like, as if you were like a spy on a mission.
Huh.
So you played this one Spider-Man game, but basically it was like you were playing 4 different games, because each Spider-Man had different strengths and weaknesses, and the worlds they inhabited were different.
That's super cool. Was the 1921 in black and white as you played it?
Yes.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
1921. Okay, yeah, you're talking. So it's
the 1920 era. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, and so far more than the 90s animated series, this video game, like, okay, I didn't even own a PS3, and I bought this game so that I could play it. So I like went over to people's houses and played it. And I just found it very interesting, the fact that you could essentially tell a story with, and in this case, not all the characters were even Peter Parker. Some of them were other people from other time periods, right?
Yeah. Have you played the most recent one for the PS4?
No.
One day.
I watched someone assembled on YouTube like a 3-hour video of all the cutscenes.
Oh, nice.
So when I was homesick from work, I watched it, and it was like 3 hours. It was pretty fun. That was really my first introduction to characters like Spider-Man Noir. Before that video game, I had never heard of him before. I thought that he was invented for the video game, and I later found out that indeed it was a comic that had been published in the late 2000s.
Which blew my mind when I went to see the movie, which also has him in it. It was just weird. Like, it's a black and white Spider-Man with a trench coat. Like, this is the coolest thing ever. I definitely would love to listen to like a radio series about that. Podcasters, get on it.
So this movie we're talking about today, you probably don't know this, Pixel, but it was first announced in 2015.
Oh.
Right around the time that it was announced that Sony was going to be working with Marvel Studios to bring Spider-Man into the MCU.
Right.
And that he was going to appear in Civil War. Sony announced pretty much at the same time that they were also going to be developing an animated film starring Miles Morales.
I remember the Miles Morales thing. I did not remember any of those other details you mentioned.
Okay. So at that point, people were actually, like when the whole news was coming out that Spider-Man was coming to the MCU, a lot of people were campaigning saying, don't even put Peter Parker in it. We've seen Peter Parker twice. Like, put Miles in the MCU.
Right. I do remember that.
Now, at that point in 2015, had you heard of Miles Morales before?
No, I had no clue that there was other Spider-Man. Like, of course, I knew about the multiverse, but I didn't know of, like, the passing on the power or, like, the next in line. Like, that was completely foreign to me.
So
I knew about Gwen Stacy being Spider-Man. That's the one
Spider-Woman.
Spider-Woman, yeah, there you go. Makes sense. Although, do the people in her city know that she's not Spider-Man, that she's Spider-Woman?
Yes.
Okay, cool. That makes sense.
Yeah. No, so this is significant because at that point in 2015, Miles Morales was a character who had been introduced in the comic books in a separate timeline. At that point, Marvel Comics had 2 different timelines going on.
Right.
There was the regular Marvel Universe, and then there was the Ultimate Universe. And it was called the Ultimate Universe because all the series that were published in that universe had the word Ultimate tagged on.
Right.
So you had Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate Fantastic Four.
So that's how you could tell the 2 universes apart? That's pretty clever, actually. I like that.
And in that world, in that storyline, they decided to kill off their Peter Parker.
Oh, jeez.
So he's murdered by the Green Goblin, and it's a huge event.
Ultimate murder.
And around the same time, they introduced this Miles Morales character, he's younger, and it drew a lot of media attention because the character is half black, half Hispanic.
Oh, super cool. Yeah.
And
nice.
so everyone was like, they're introducing a black Spider-Man. Like it drew a lot of media attention because it was seemingly introducing a new character for the sake of diversity.
Right.
And people who were fans of Peter Parker didn't take too kindly to it.
Well, they still had the other world. Like, this isn't like replacing the character himself. This is Peter Parker dying, and then in that universe, another character taking his place. This isn't like, I don't know. There's a few comparisons I can see, but this isn't like Doctor Who where Peter Parker undergoes a surgery to become black.
Exactly.
This is a very
and that was the
take.
thing. So like people always had to say like, look, you can still have your Peter Parker in the regular comics, and then this universe,
Miles Morales is a superhero,
and he'll be the Spider-Man over here.
Yeah.
And by the time that this announcement came out in 2015, the Ultimate line of comics had basically like fizzled out. Like
right.
They said these aren't selling as well. It's getting to the point now where people are getting confused because there's like 2 parallel universes
Ultimate
running
failure.
along here. Yeah, the ultimate failure. So they did a thing where they essentially merged the universes, and they kept the parts from the Ultimate series they really liked, which essentially amounted to Miles and a handful of other characters. So at this point in 2015, when they're announcing Spider-Man coming to the MCU, there were 2 different Spider-Men in the comics, like in the one universe. I don't know if this is making sense or not.
No, it makes sense. Makes sense.
And so people were saying, yes, like put Miles in the MCU. We don't need another Peter Parker. Shortly after, it was announced that, yes, we were going to be having another Peter Parker in the movie.
Right.
So that disappointed fans of Miles Morales. But shortly thereafter, they made the announcement that they were going to be doing an animated film about Miles Morales. And, of course, a lot of people at the time, this is going back over 3 years now, saw it as like a secondary status. It's like, oh, he's getting an animated
relegated
movie
to this animated section. However, having seen the movie, we'll talk about that later. Let's just say the secondary status won't last that long.
And when the first trailer for this film did end up coming out, I was blown away because
it moved like nothing I'd ever seen before. Like it was the smoothest and choppiest animation at the same time that I'd ever seen. Like they just had kind of this rhythm to it, this like sensible like comic strip movement to it that just, I don't know, it has a timing punch to it that I can't quite explain.
Yeah, and it was basically a year and a half between the announcement of the movie and the announcement that Phil Lord and Chris Miller were going to be working on it to then when we got the trailer. So when the trailer showed up, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot this was happening. And the animation looked spectacular, and it really emphasized like as if it was going to be a Miles Morales movie, except when the title comes up, it says Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Right.
So all of a sudden, all of us who are in the know understand, oh, this is no longer just a movie about Miles Morales. They're going to try and bring in other Spider-Men, and then the trailer ends with him saying, so how many other Spider people are there? Not the funny part that's actually in the movie. This was a scene that didn't actually end up in the film.
There was a scene in the trailer that wasn't in the film, and it made me sad.
So all of a sudden, all of us, like as if our spider sense is going off saying, wait a minute.
If this is the Spider-Verse, there's going to be a heck of a lot more going on than we were bargaining for.
And you realize this isn't just a Miles Morales movie anymore.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that a bit more later. All that to say, the end result is not what was originally announced.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder if they just announced it in the wrong way, or if they had planned this all along, and this is just kind of what they ended up surprising us with.
Yeah, I would be curious to find out like what point they decided to go from just doing a Miles Spider-Man movie to then all of a sudden doing a Spider-Verse movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because by the time the second trailer came out, you see the older Peter Parker, you see Gwen Stacy, and you realize, okay, yeah, there's going to be more Spider people in this than just Miles.
Yep.
And like as you pointed out, the animation, like as it was previewed in the trailers, looks phenomenal, and it certainly piqued my interest.
It's one of those things where you get used to a certain style of 3D animation from like Disney and from DreamWorks, where when it changes, and I'm not saying like mixing 2D animated with 3D, which I thoroughly dislike, they took...
Did you not like it in Moana?
No.
With the tattoos?
Oh, well, that's different. That's a 3D animated 2D surface.
Oh, I
like
see.
it's on a 3D surface, so
Right.
it's kind of like when you cut to fully 3D. Anyways, this and that, but yes, it was just a very different use of a very powerful engine. So it was kind of neat to see it. Like it has this graffiti, bright, colorful feel to it, and I love bright colors. Just gonna love this movie forever.
Well, so this movie drew my attention even more a few weeks ago when the early critic scores were coming out. When the tomato meter was first announced for this movie, it had 100%.
Like no downvotes on it yet?
Yeah, like the first 15 critics that reviewed the movie all gave it like near perfect scores.
Wow. All right.
And as of right now, as I speak, the movie is sitting at 97%.
With how many reviewers?
248.
Okay.
So, and 241 have given it a fresh review and 7 have given it a rotten review.
However, how are the people who actually went to see the movie? What was their take on it?
So the movie got an A+ through CinemaScore.
Okay, and what's the tomatoes?
The audience score for Rotten Tomatoes is 95%.
Oh my gosh! I can see why. It's very much a crowd-pleasing movie, and not just crowd-pleasing. It's just a good movie in general. Good moving narrative, good moving parts.
See, this is part of why I'm surprised that critics like it so much, because it is a very comic book movie. It tells a comic book story. Like, you can't get more comic booky than alternate versions of the same character populating the same universe.
Right. That's very much like if you were to watch an anime movie, it's like halfway through the movie, the bad guy joins the good guys and they start doing their own thing. Like, that's the kind of story that people have been complaining we have too many superhero movies recently. I don't know if you've heard those articles.
Oh, I've heard it.
Yeah. So it's
Do I agree with it? No, but that's fine.
The problem is we're getting bad movies in the superhero genre. It's just a genre. It's not.
Is that your like really French way of pronouncing genre?
Le genre. No, c'est le genre. Je te le dis. It's this. It's that. Yes, no toaster. But it's just a umbrella under which you can tell a story. You can tell a good story. You can tell a bad story. This movie proves that you can still tell a good superhero story. You just have to actually write it well.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because essentially my expectations were put super high because the reception from the critics was so high.
Right. Were you disappointed in any way through watching it, or did you?
Well, we'll talk about more in spoilers.
Right.
Why I think this is the case.
Oh yeah, that scene at 10 minutes in where like everyone died. You know, yeah.
But all that to say, it brings me great joy as a comic book fan, as a fan of Spider-Man, to see that a movie like this can come out and it can essentially cast its spell over the critics.
Yep.
Who would be dismissive of other superhero comic book movies, but really, really love it and give it praise and to see that's a movie that audiences can connect with as well.
No, and they made very real characters underneath the masks, and that was really nice to see. So are we going to go into a little bit of the story without those spoilers?
Well, we got to talk about the box office first.
How's it doing?
Okay, so the highest opening weekend for an animated film in December was previously held by Sing.
Oh, I thought Frozen would definitely have
that came out in November.
Okay, that makes sense. So
when Sing came out 2 years ago,
all right,
it made $35.2 million.
Okay.
So bearing that in mind, knowing that is the high, I'm going to turn my computer away so you can't see.
Yeah, so I can't see it. Complete surprise. However, I feel that's kind of low, and Sing just didn't hit my radar, so I'm expecting higher numbers from Spider-Verse.
Okay, so what do you suggest or propose?
I'm going to say 56 million.
So it made $35.4 million.
Dagnabbit. All right, that was way too high. I'm gonna go sit down for a little bit.
So I find this hilarious because the headline on Box Office Mojo says Spider-Verse earns the highest grossing animated debut for December, but it
beat it by like
$200,000.
Exactly.
I guess not all that impressive.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it can now say it holds that record. The fact that it is indeed the highest grossing opening for an animated film in December.
And it deserves it. It's a good story. Anyway, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself here.
Interesting stats on the audience, that 63% of the audience was male, which is skewed higher than if you talk about like Homecoming that came out last year. And 41% was over the age of 25.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. Like people growing up with the series wanting to go back to it. The Spider-Verse being more of a grip and a hook for those who had seen the original series, who would be in their late 20s.
Yeah, and I would almost go as far as say, like, even though this is animated and it is like more family friendly than the live action
it's
one,
a solid it's got some solid content.
Yeah, like there are some emotional beats and heavy things that happen in this. I wouldn't recommend this for anyone under the age of 9.
Yeah. No, I 100%
there's emotionally complex things, and parents, maybe you have really emotionally mature kids that can understand how to process things like death, but yeah, I would not recommend this for anyone younger than that.
Yep.
So I think that might have hurt the movie's general appeal because it is a little more mature. Mm-hmm. And it's this weird sweet spot of like, it's animated, so certain people assume it's for kids, but then in actuality it isn't kid friendly enough for kids.
Exactly.
So it draws a smaller crowd, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So all you snobby people who don't like animated movies just because they're animated, go see this.
You will instantly change your mind. It's a solid story told in an animated format.
And has an A+ from CinemaScore. That means people leaving the theater gave it an A+.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
And it has the 95% from audiences, which I think is pretty impressive by most accounts.
I rarely see that. Like, there are movies where I disagree with their rating, like when it gets to like the 60s and I really like the movie. But this, like, I just had a blast.
Well, let's get into it now. So tell us, what do you think the story was?
So story is basically...
When do I know I'm Spider-Man?
This was never your city. It's mine.
You won't. In the end, it's a leap of faith.
Can't stop me now!
Hey guys. Who are you?
I'm Spider-Woman.
If we don't work together, none of us will have a home to go home to. We taught him that, right?
I didn't teach him that, and you definitely didn't.
Into the Spider-Verse.
I'm going to try to avoid spoilers as best I can. Up and coming Spider-Man, Miles Morales. This young boy who grew up in the hood in the city. There is a Spider-Man who currently exists in his world. He gets bitten by a spider, and he starts becoming Spider-Man. But because of the situation that he ends up in, Kingpin builds a particle collider and ends up bringing in a few more Spider-Man into the city than he was expecting. And it's just how they all work together to fix Kingpin's mistakes and save the day.
Wonderful job.
Thank you,
That was a masterful synopsis of the film.
Spoiler-free. Extra butter.
Spider-Man is a character that I think was built for animation.
I agree with that.
Because his costume, no matter what version of it is always a visual delight. And it's hard to pull off in live action because the way it's drawn in the comic books, his eyes are, they're supposed to be like lenses, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they move and they emote, and they've found a clever way in the MCU to basically mimic that effect.
Yep.
But that can only be replicated with CGI and with animation.
Whereas in this case, it's easy to just be like, yeah, I'm going to make him give you the Rock stare, and you're going to know that it's the Rock stare without needing to do all this complicated animation because it's just his face. Like, his bone structure and his facial features move in ways that shouldn't be able to make those faces, but they can, and we believe it because it's Spider-Man.
And the costume is hard to pull off in live action, and just anything Spider-Man does is hard to do in live action. Like, as impressive as it has been to have had these, 6 live action Spider-Man films, the reality is that they all heavily rely on animation to accomplish the feats that Spider-Man is capable of.
Meaning, animation is just the way to go.
Yes, no, seriously, because I don't know how else to say this. Spider-Man is just the character that is built for animation. The fact that his costume covers him from head to toe, there's really no point in having a named actor in that suit because
you got a whole Rangers thing going on. You can just have someone moving and doing the things.
Yeah, and then we get in all these issues with actors wanting screen time. So if Spider-Man's pulling his mask off for no particular reason,
right?
But I digress. So all that to say, so the very fact that Spider-Man is a character built for animation, the fact that there is a film like this that really takes advantage of that. It does an incredible job of portraying the way Spider-Man moves, and to see the different variations of how the different Spider-Men move, and the places that things they can do with the web slinging that again have to be, even in the live action films, are accomplished via computer animation. So just take us all the way there.
When we watched the original 90s Spider-Man, we always said he would just hook his spider webs onto the clouds and just swing around because some of the angles didn't make sense. But it didn't matter because it was animated. You didn't need to hook onto things. Just hook onto the clouds.
So I was blown away with the way this film looked. It felt like a comic book come to life.
And they just had pacing and stamping in classic comic book speech bubbles and stuff in a way that just felt great. Like at one point, Miles is talking to himself and he's going, "Oh no, oh no, 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 no." And as it comes in, it's just these little speech bubbles, "No, no, 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 no," popping up on the screen. And it doesn't take away from the moment. It just adds to this confusion that he's feeling. It's so good, and it's got a Brooklyn graffiti look to it that's not overdone. I think I've grown a little tired of grunge look in some advertising, but this one is just this vibrant and attractive bold line visual representation where they can throw in boom, pow, color, and then suddenly dark, and it doesn't take away from it. It's just really nice.
You see the thwip sound effect come out when they shoot the web shooters.
Oh, I love that.
You see punching sound effects. You see, You see the thought bubbles. You see,
when he's typing on a computer, clickety clackety is appearing up next to him. It's just enjoyable.
They use like some of the techniques actually done in comic books to color in things. Like there's this one thing where they basically, instead of just coloring in a character's face, they'll put a whole bunch of tiny dots on the page to essentially color in the person's skin or their clothes. And they do that for certain elements of this film. And there's another element that's used a lot in manga where basically they use the strokes of the pen to color in something or to illustrate shadow. They do a bit of that in this movie.
Yeah.
And they even have some paneling going on. Like they literally have the panes,
the character like moving between like panes and windows, and they're using buildings to create paneling. It's like whoever built the visuals for this movie knows a lot of stuff. Like they brought in like classic pieces of multiple types of comic and storytelling and did it well. Like I'm dumbfounded.
I feel like I need to see the movie again because I was so like intent on looking for Easter eggs that I feel like a lot of the visuals just kind of flew by me and then they were gone before I could even...
I keep on wondering if there's a dog in the house and it's literally the bells jingling on your hat. It's the best. I was just like, oh, you have a dog now? No, it's just your hat. But yeah, no, the movie has so much in it that you can watch it multiple times. And it's one of the first movies in the past couple of years that I probably am going to go watch again, or at least watch it from my home a few times and enjoy.
I would almost go as far to say there's too much going on.
Yeah.
Like there were moments where I was like, my eyes can't take any more stimulus. Like there's explosions going on and things going on here and people are moving around.
And there's colors and things just like moving out super quick. But I personally love that. Like for me, the stimulus was just a ton of fun. But yeah, there were moments where it was, I was like trying to focus on the action and there's just a lot going on that's just like, hey, you could look at this. I was like, nah, yeah, but I'm going to miss the thing. How about the music?
So Miles Morales, as he was introduced in the comics, he was more or less, in personality-wise, he was pretty much the same as Peter Parker.
Right.
They kind of changed the dynamic, obviously, by making him a different race, by giving him actual parents and a best friend to kind of like work with.
Whenever they're in the suits, I found it interesting that they instantly became like the mouthy Spider-Man. Like it was kind of interesting to see that switch without much work, but
I bring that up with the music because they did a good job of using music to kind of like portray Miles' character, and you see like he's listening to like R&B, like kind of almost rap music on his headphones, and when he's doing his graffiti. All of that is stuff that was invented for this movie. Like,
oh, interesting.
Like what I'm trying to get at is that the portrayal of Miles Morales in this film is not from the comics, and I would say it's an improvement over what's in the comics.
Right, because they didn't just copy paste Peter Parker; they made him his own character.
Exactly.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and the music choices, the interests, and the family life that he has. Definitely a departure from the previous Miles Morales, and just deeper. I think that's everything about this movie is that they go a little bit deeper than you anticipate, and it's a welcome change.
And I've said this before on this show. I'm a fan of changes to source material when it improves upon what was already there.
There we go.
When it's something that detracts or is inferior to the source material, then it's a questionable and head scratching and frankly stupid decision.
Yeah, I think Spider-Verse is going to be my go-to golden rule for, hey, why don't I like changes? Well, it's like, okay, they changed this and this just because they wanted to. This change with Miles was a great story and it was done well. This is okay. This is why I don't like this other thing.
Yeah, and I'm not really into the R&B rap world, but the songs that they played in this movie, I was like,
they weren't bothersome.
Yeah.
No, I felt that too. I was just like, are they going to have like one rap song just like constantly like banging away? It's like, no, it was actually just pleasant music choices that went with the character. Okay, I was thinking about that earlier and I didn't know if anyone else had caught on to it. Okay, cool.
And this isn't really a spoiler, but there are references to the 60s Spider-Man theme song, which is just classic. So
right. Yeah, it plays in a few places here and there.
So I think we can agree that this movie is universally loved by critics and audiences.
Yep.
One of the only criticisms I've heard people make is they say that there's a few too many spider people in the movie. Would you agree with that?
I mean, okay, so I have two answers. My first answer is I only say yes if this is going to be the only movie in the series. If this is the only movie in the series, yes, there were too many spider people. However, if they're setting this up for more movies, I say no, this is the perfect amount of spider people. Each one of them brought a fun little addition to it, and it just added onto it. Like you have, I can't go into it yet, but if it's the only movie, if it's a standalone movie, maybe yes, there's maybe one too many spider people. If this is a multiple series, I'm going to say that no, this is a good amount to start introducing the capacity of what this world can do.
I think the movie would have been just as fine if they'd... I mean, it's not really a spoiler to say this, but they introduced essentially half of the spider people late into the game, far along in the film.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And aside from having like really funny moments and interesting takes on the Spider-Man character, the movie could have gone along fine without them.
I can agree with that, yeah.
But their inclusion does emphasize this kind of theme of the movie that really anyone can be Spider-Man. And Stan Lee had said, he's reflected upon this before, but...
He says it in the movie and near the end, that anyone can wear the mask.
Well, part of the appeal of Spider-Man as a character is that because his costume quite literally envelops you from head to toe, it doesn't matter what you look like. You could be Spider-Man, it wouldn't matter.
And the line actually shows up in the movie. It's like, we need you. You need to be Spider-Man. It's like, they're talking to me. And this random person next to him is like, probably not you specifically, kid. Even though, yes, him specifically.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting because the idea of legacy heroes is a very common trope in comic books where a mantle
is passed on, a mantle of power, or like literally the clothing is passed on.
Yeah, like the costume identity. But to the common person who is not invested in nerd culture like we are, a superhero is associated with a specific character.
Yeah.
It's like that person is Spider-Man, that person is Iron Man.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of like kind of passing on the mantle is not as commonly understood.
Yeah, like they don't age. Like, for example, like Ash Ketchum in the Pokemon series is Ash Ketchum. Like he doesn't really age and then pass on his Pikachu to a new person. He's a character. Like Tony Stark is Iron Man. Even though they do change him, people love the quippy ridiculousness of Tony Stark. And I think that's because when you first create a comic book character and he becomes successful because of who he is. And it's very hard to change that because if you change it, a superhero isn't just his powers. You know, it's very philosophical, but people love the hero for who he is. And if you just pass on his powers and change who they are, you might pick up a new audience, but you might lose what people fell in love with in the first place, and that's the character.
And that was my fear with them, like emphasizing this, like what makes you, because there's a line in the trailer where Peter Parker says, what makes you different is what makes you Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And I was afraid that this movie was really going to kind of
just be like, it's because you're different that you're Spider-Man. Everyone,
well,
all the diversity.
Not even that, but to take away from the uniqueness of Peter Parker's character, because like there is something about his character and the selflessness he has that imbues and is part of the Spider-Man character. I was afraid that it was going to really downplay Peter Parker for the sake of saying anybody can be Spider-Man. There's nothing special about it. It's just like anybody just needs to get the bite and that's it. But you know what? Like they did him justice.
Mm-hmm. And at the same time, Miles was bitten, but he wasn't Spider-Man until certain things happened in the movie. So he had to go through some kind of emotional growth and have some changes to become who he was meant to be.
I was really blown away by the feels in this movie. Like,
my goodness!
There's at least 3 or 4 moments
where you're just moved to tears.
It's like, I did not come here tonight expecting that.
Yeah, no, but like they bring you in to these characters where you think it's just going to be a high flying adventure, and then they're like, hey, these characters have been through tough stuff, and we're going to get into that, and you're just like, wow, all right, I need to sit down for a minute, and then you realize you're in a theater.
I think that like the level of emotional complexity is part of what the critics love about the movie so much.
Yeah.
The other thing I will get to in spoilers.
Right.
And so that this is the final thing I'd like to comment on that isn't spoiler free, is that this is fairly mature for an all ages film. So like there's this one family that I was trying to pitch the movie to. It's like, oh yeah, like it's Spider-Man and all these other Spider people. And their oldest child is like 5 or 6 years old, and now I've like gone back and said like no like don't.
Well, please wait, cut the mic.
Because like there's I don't know how to say it. There's mature stuff that unless your kid is ready to talk about and work through,
it's gonna be like a lot of stuff. Like I think that's for a lot of the families like I know parents who just bring their kids to horror movies when they're like 7 or 8. So I can see them going to see the Spider-Verse movies and not caring. But, for the discerning parent,
Right.
we'll hope for a little bit more.
All right. So you got anything else you want to say that isn't spoilery?
No. We're just it's spoiler time.
Okay.
Time to get into what makes this movie tick. And boy, it has been hard to keep my mouth shut this first half of the episode because there's some good stuff in here.
Well, so the way the trailers were constructed, it made it seem like the Spider-Man that encounters Miles was the
Spider-Man of that city.
I thought it was the Spider-Man from the parallel Earth.
Right.
The older Spider-Man.
And then Miles is just the only person in his universe.
Well, yes and no, because it was like the first trailer shows Miles in his suit at a grave.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, is this a world where Peter Parker's already died?
Right.
And then when I saw Venom, the post-credit scene was like showing like 4 minutes from Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse.
Oh, okay.
And it's the scene where he goes to the grave.
Right.
And
so you think the Spider-Man in his world is dead, there's been no replacement yet.
Exactly. So that was my assumption, is that the movie was going to start with Miles being in a world where Peter Parker has already died. Mm-hmm. And all those like funny moments in the trailer where like Peter Parker's introducing his life, I thought those were all attributed to the Peter B. Parker that shows up later. Yeah. But no, actually, like they take time to introduce you to the Spider-Man of the Peter Parker, I should say, of Miles' world.
Who seems like a great guy. Like he's just a really enjoyable... Is he the Spider-Man of the 90s? No, Peter B. Parker is the 90s Spider-Man, right?
Peter B. Parker is the one who is older and he's in his 30s.
Right.
They say that this Peter Parker was only 26.
Okay,
right?
So the Peter B. Parker, when we grew up watching the 90s Spider-Man, it would have been him, right?
I guess so. If that's one way to think about it.
Because he wasn't blonde.
No, and it's actually funny. Like this movie was like playing tricks with myself because I'm like, he doesn't sound like Jake Johnson. But it must be him because he's playing the part. And then I'm like, they took his mask on. I was like, his hair looks blonde. Like that can't be right. I must be seeing things. But sure enough, no, like indeed that world's Peter Parker is blonde, and was voiced by Chris Pine. He was not voiced by
oh my goodness, that makes so much
Jake
sense.
Johnson. So the whole idea that they actually introduced us to Miles Peter Parker before introducing us to Peter B. Parker, mm-hmm. I thought that was an interesting choice.
Yeah, and then I was not ready for him to be killed.
Oh, well, yeah, because you probably didn't expect. I was like, he has to die. Like that's
no, I thought he was just going to start showing him, and they were all going to work together. But no, then Kingpin just goes in and crushes him into the ground, and I was like, is he? Oh, he's not okay. That's a bad like. And the soundtrack changes. I was like, that's a death soundtrack.
And then the scene afterwards, like the news coverage, and like that was one of the really feely moments.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was a character I knew. Obviously, and this is the thing. So
I'm gonna be honest. I've never seen Spider-Man die before, so that was a lot.
Okay. Well, so the producers of the film have said that the Peter Parker we see, played by Chris Pine, was meant to be like an amalgam of the Spider-Man from the different movies.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So he does a lot of the stuff that like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man has done.
Right.
That and there's elements that kind of pay homage to Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland.
Okay. So
he was kind of like meant to be like the best Spider-Man, like Spider-Man at his prime, at his peak.
That makes sense. Yeah. Because everyone else has something wrong with them.
Like it's a Spider-Man who has his own spider cave with all this extra costumes and stuff.
Yeah.
Spider-Man at the top of
one
his
of them
game.
having a cape.
Yeah. Which apparently is like some deep reference in like this one random issue of a comic from like the 70s.
What the heck? They would. Of course they would.
So I was impressed because Sony has had a reputation for having trailers that reveal too much.
Yep.
So I was impressed then because they basically swapped out the dialogue, because I looked back at the trailer and it is Jake Johnson's voice in the trailer in those scenes that have Chris Pine in the movie.
Interesting. So they really kept it under wraps.
Yeah, they really misdirected us there.
Good. I like that. That's like when Wreck-It Ralph had like the hidden piece of information that was in the trailer but wasn't in the movie. Yeah, no, I like that. It's good.
So I knew he was going to die because I'm like, you can't have a Miles Morales.
You could have warned me, Average Joe. You could have
sorry.
spared me so much pain.
What are you going to do?
Cry. I'm going to cry mostly.
I want to just get this out of the way now. So part of the reason why I think the critics love this movie so much is because it promotes diversity. Not just diversity of men and women, but racial diversity as well. Because obviously Miles he's half black and half Puerto Rican, so he's part Spanish, Hispanic. You have Penny Parker, who is Japanese.
Yep.
And then you have, Peter Porker, who's a pig.
Complete diversity.
We got everyone.
Yeah.
Black and white people.
Yeah. People from a black and white world.
People who can only see, who people are colorblind. I guess he represents that demographic.
Oh man. No, but and it does it in a way that doesn't feel like it's shoved in a blender. And I think that's a lot of movies nowadays. Like they'll put diversity in for diversity's sake, and it really takes away from the movie. And this was the first pleasant and enjoyable use of diversity, and I really enjoyed it.
Because this is my thing, is the movie was great and I really liked it, but I don't think it's 97% great.
Yeah.
And I think part of that I'm going to call it an artificial inflation, is simply because critics responded well to a movie that has a diverse cast and promotes the idea that anyone can be a hero, which is that's not a bad thing. And
no, exactly. But it's not something that actually reflects the objective worth of the movie. Not that we can do that, but we don't have that lens.
It's the same reason that, in my opinion, Black Panther is being overhyped by critics and it's going to be overhyped by all the award shows. Black Panther is a great movie, but it is not as good as the critics are making it out to be.
No, there are some better Marvel Cinematic Universe movies than Black Panther, but it's a good movie. It's not I wasn't absolutely blown away by it as I was by Spider-Verse.
And then to compare it again to Black Panther, there's a lot of intentional conversation around race and racial identity in that movie. In this one, I don't think I heard Miles once say, "Oh, I'm black."
Yeah, no, he's Miles.
He's a kid from Brooklyn.
Yeah, no, he's just a character, and they tell a story, and it's great.
Yeah, and the fact that these other spider people are from different dimensions, or that they're men or women, it doesn't matter. It's just that's who they are.
They're just Spider-Man. That's their identity. Yeah.
And I mentioned this in non-spoilers, but in most of these characters' instances, there are differences from how their stories are told in the comic books.
Mm-hmm.
Peter B. Parker,
right,
who I want to talk more about a little bit later, there's no Spider-Man who fits that criteria.
No, I was kind of confused by his character. I was just this failure of a spider. The closest I could see was Tobey Maguire's failures in movie 2, or number. I like how they made fun of Spider-Man 3. But yeah, no, he's kind of just there as someone who needs growth just as much as Miles does.
Yeah. And again, I'm all for it. Miles' origin and the whole thing with him and the graffiti being his passion, that he's going to the school where he feels like an outsider. That's all stuff they came up with for this movie.
And it's great.
And it's a welcome addition.
It plays well.
And it turns out that I thought when I saw the trailer and I saw that Penny Parker was in there, I'm like, oh my gosh, they just came up with some stupid anime ripoff thing for the movie.
Is she real?
So she is from the comics, but she was created for an event called Spider-Verse 4 years ago.
Oh, so sneaking it in at the last minute, if you can say it.
Yeah, so
I would be curious about reading it.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a whole lot of material out about her and the spider robot.
Spitterbot.
But it is from the comics, but it was created for a crossover. So
okay, that makes sense.
Bear in mind that.
Yeah. So that's she doesn't feel as much fleshed out, and that makes a little bit more sense now.
The one element from Miles' origin that is kind of consistent from the comics is his relationship with his uncle Aaron.
Mm-hmm. I was not seeing that coming. Why don't you explain the story with Aaron? Because I did not know that, and it was cool to see that.
Yeah, so in the comics, Miles has an uncle who's a criminal, and he's revealed to be the Prowler of the Ultimate Universe.
This character that he fights against for a while, and that ends up getting killed.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he gets killed in the comics, but certainly that whole dynamic of, oh, this is my role model I look up to, and then he becomes Spider-Man, then finds out, oh, actually,
my role model's not who I thought he was.
Yeah, and now it's somebody I have to actually battle against. So I saw that twist coming because I'm like, yeah, this is the thing from the comics. It's not. It's actually Donald Glover played Aaron Davis in Spider-Man: Homecoming.
Remind me.
So he's the guy that Spider-Man goes to for information about where to find the goods, and he webs him to the back of his car door.
Nice. Okay, cool.
And speaking of Donald Glover, he actually had a kind of a role in Miles' creation in the comics, because when they first announced they were doing the Amazing Spider-Man,
right,
Donald Glover was like, "Hey, I want to be Spider-Man," and that happened around the same time Miles was introduced in the comics.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay,
so people give Donald Glover credit for creating Miles because he basically gave the idea of a black person being Spider-Man. Yeah. It's not necessarily true, because the writers involved have gone back and shown that they were already planning to introduce him when he made that statement. So
yeah. It's just kind of a funny.
But they
little...
made an Easter egg reference to Donald Glover in this because when he's visiting his uncle, the episode of Community where he's getting out of bed in his Spider-Man pajamas is playing.
No way.
Yeah, I didn't notice it.
Did they animate it in 3D?
I don't know. I missed it.
Okay, I've got to see that.
I found that out in an Easter egg video this morning.
That's so funny. That's great.
And for Miles' costume, in the comics, literally a person from S.H.I.E.L.D. just hands it to him in a suitcase.
I like the fact that he spray painted it black and had a kind of spray paint spider logo on it. However, I was like, if Miles used real spray paint, that would mess up the joints on the suit so bad. Like, have you ever moved something that you've newly painted, especially cloth? Like, unless you're dyeing the
Maybe
cloth.
it's some kind of super spandex or something.
No, because he just grabbed a can of paint. It doesn't matter what it is. Like, it's going to make a mess.
Okay, well, I was able to suspend. But my point is, like, even just the very fact that he makes the costume himself.
Yeah, is great.
As
I love
opposed
that.
to, like, somebody from S.H.I.E.L.D. being like, Here, we came up with this idea for a new costume for you.
We made it black for you. Like, no. Like,
because you're black.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, it wasn't that kind of push. It was him coming into his own and building and coloring this great spider suit. And I love that. No, it was really, really, really neat.
And despite how well Miles was done, I think my favorite character might have been Peter B. Parker.
Yeah, he was a weird puzzle for me. Like, he seemed to not care and really care. It was only... Okay, I had the wrong impression of him. By the end of the movie, I realized that he was someone who was lazy and fearful and wanted to do the right thing. I thought he was just lazy. And there we go. That nice ring was me announcing that I should hydrate myself and have a nice drink of water.
Well, first of all, there's never been a Peter Parker or any Spider-Man character like this in any of the movies. Mm-hmm. So the fact that... I mean, the trailers kind of suggested that he was going to be like a hobo-ish Spider-Man, and you didn't really know why.
Yeah.
But man, like once they get into like saying that he's been doing it for 20 years and that his Aunt May has died and that he got divorced from Mary Jane because he was afraid of having kids, like that's
his life sucks.
And that's kind of par for the course for Peter Parker. And so you have to imagine if, you know, people often refer to Spider-Man as having the Parker luck, meaning like things never go the way he wants them to. Mm-hmm. So you have to imagine. Most of the stories we see about Spider-Man are in his teens or his 20s.
Where, you know, things haven't gone horribly wrong yet. But what happens when you're an old Spider-Man?
Yeah, and what I really appreciate about his character is that it's like, yeah, he's kind of dismissive and he doesn't want to get involved. But at the end of the day, he still does the right thing. Like,
yeah.
And even though they make a lot of jokes about him being like kind of out of shape, he's still like super good at Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, and he's like moving around and sneaking in. Like he doesn't really lose it. Whereas you think he'll be crashing into stuff, he still has spider-like abilities.
Like he's still in a sense Spider-Man at his prime in terms of his abilities.
Yeah.
And he's like, there's a joke where he like predicts what the villain's gonna say. Like I appreciated the fact that even though they chose to make him kind of like a Spider-Man down on his luck and a Spider-Man who's like in need of emotional growth,
he's still Spider-Man,
and he hasn't given up being Spider-Man, and that he still can do the job better than anybody else.
Now, the coolest, I don't know if this was like this in the original 90s Spider-Man, but the coolest character to see the motivation for was Kingpin. I think this was
that was shocking for me.
This was the first time I've seen a villain in one of these movies not have a MacGuffin. Like, it was a bit of a MacGuffin because this is what caused the whole thing, but he had a real draw to do what he was doing, and it flavored the entire movie. Like, so I'm going to give the background of it. Like, he loses his wife and his child in a car crash because he is so obsessed with power that he's fighting Spider-Man at one point, and his wife is seeing him, this violent man, and they run away and they get hit by a truck. Like, it's terrible, it's gut-wrenching, and you really feel for him. And he does, with all the power and resources he has, he does whatever he can to get them back, including opening a portal to another dimension to try and find another dimension's version of his wife and child. It is understandable. It is, you know, wow, I can't believe he's going to these lengths to fix things, but it echoes Spider-Man's own search for trying to make things right when his Uncle Ben dies. Like, Spider-Man doesn't have that kind of power. He can't build a multi-dimensional portal, but like, who's to say that in the wrong universe, Spider-Man wouldn't want to try and save his Uncle Ben through a multi-dimensional... Like, if a fresh Spider-Man who lost his uncle knew he could do that, he might try it.
Yeah, and there's some good Flash stories about that because since the Flash has the power to go back in time, he has gone around and tried to prevent bad things that have happened to him from happening, and never ends up well for him. But I would agree, and that was another one of the moments where I was like, oh,
like this is intense. No, it was really gut wrenching, but it just felt so real.
I really wasn't a fan of how he looked. Like I felt he was like cartoonishly huge.
Oh yeah, he's this tiny head in this enormous body.
Like compared to everyone else, I'm like, this is outlandish. Like how massive he is.
Yeah, everyone else pretty much looks human. He just looks like a gorilla with a human head stitched in front of it. Not even his head doesn't even sit on top of his body. It sits in like the middle front.
Yeah, it was. If I have to complain about things in the movie, that would be it.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mentioned how like half the Spider-Man just sort of show up.
Yep.
So that would be Spider-Man Noir, Spider-Ham, and Penny Parker.
All right, let's go over each of them just quickly.
So Spider-Man Noir, as
voiced by Nicolas Cage.
Nicolas Cage. That man's had a good year. He played Superman in that Teen Titans movie we saw, and then now he's Spider-Man. It's a character that like the comics are actually very dark, and like imagine it's like a film noir Spider-Man.
Yeah, you've got the people are being murdered, his friends and family are in danger of the mob. Like it's a very real and dangerous world.
Yeah, it's like, and it's the Great Depression, so things are kind of grimy anyway. So they did the good job of essentially making him more family friendly in this because he's basically just evoking like actors like Humphrey Bogart who are like from that era.
Oh, see, and I saw a dame and she was in with a trouble, but I shot the people chasing her twice and we made our way down the city streets. Like it's just really, really cool.
Yeah, and there's lots of funny jokes with him, like him not being able to see anything in color. And
they hand him a Rubik's Cube at one point. He's like, what is it? I don't get it.
Sometimes I light matches just so I can feel anything.
It's just so ridiculous and great. Like he's got wind blowing through. It's like blowing his cape around. They're like, why is your cape moving? We're underground. There's no wind. It's like everywhere I go, the wind follows. Yeah. It smells like rain. And you're like, oh god, it's so over the top that it's perfect.
Yeah, and he's animated in black and white as if it was like a classic film.
Yeah.
He never even takes his mask off, so like you don't even know what that Peter Parker looks like. Yeah. So yes, he was funny and like he had some like good moments of wisdom, I guess, for Miles, but he didn't have to be there.
Nope, really didn't.
And then Spider-Ham, that is a comic from the 80s. Like I remember reading old comics and there'd occasionally be like in between like these gag comics.
And that was that?
And it's like this
spectacular Spider-Ham is just a Looney Tunes Spider-Man. Everything from like hammers hidden in like hammer space weaponry where he just pulls stuff out of nowhere, flattens people's, drops anvils on them. Yeah. It is very much comic relief, and we could have done without it.
He was a spider originally bitten by a radioactive pig.
So weird.
And like Mary Jane's like a water buffalo in that world, so it's like her name's Mary Jane Water Buffalo instead of Watson.
Oh my gosh! Like I want them to make a Saturday morning Spider-Ham comic because that would be great.
And just so anyone asks, Spider-Ham predated the joke in the Simpsons movie by a good 20 years. So no, they did not take this from the thing in the Simpsons movie.
Spider-Pig.
So just anybody who thinks that, you're wrong. I'm sorry, but you're wrong.
You're wrong and you're not right. So yes, it's an oldie, but a goodie.
And then we have Penny Parker and Spider, who again we've touched on a bit.
And this one's a bit loose because they technically 4 years ago were working on this. They did create this for the crossover in a way.
In the comics, not like this crossover.
Yeah, like I'd be curious in reading it. Like I love Japanese culture and I love a lot of the way that they can take things. But once again, if the story is not good, then all right, whatever, cool.
She added interesting elements to the animation because, like, the animation on her
was Japanese animation. Like, you had the eyes wide out in anger. You had the really fast movement or the slow-mo movement and emotions that you see a lot in, like, Japanese anime. Really, really interesting stuff.
So, yeah, she was interesting to look at, but again, like, she didn't really contribute anything to the story. She was just kind of like, there's like one scene where like all four of them are kind of ganging up on Miles, being like, "Don't you know what to do?" Or like, and
can you program really fast?
Yeah, like they illustrate like what being a veteran spider person looks like.
Yeah,
I think that's probably the best thing they would have actually contributed to the story is helping Miles understand how much there goes into being an experienced spider person. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like those three could have easily not like. Again, I feel like I'm picking on them. Like I enjoyed them, but they didn't have to be there. Gwen Stacy you're probably familiar with her mostly from the Amazing Spider-Man movies.
Yeah. So you have. I did know a little bit about. Not Gwenpool. That's another thing. The Gwenpool is a ton of fun, by the way. They wrote that comic really well. But Gwen Stacy becoming Spider-Woman is a really fun story. And her design is not the. I didn't really like the original Spider-Woman design because it's still the black and red. Her white and black design, which is newer, is really enjoyable, and I think draws me more to the comics now.
There's been about 5 different Spider-Women in the comics.
Okay, that makes sense. I like this new one.
Well, and I think it was a combination of when they introduced the concepts. It's like, hey, imagine if Gwen Stacy was Spider-Man, but they also came with that killer look. Like the visual is amazing with the hood and the black and the pink and the little teal in there.
Yep.
Of course, in classic Spider-Man comics, Gwen Stacy is famous for being killed.
Yeah,
and so
he tries to catch her. He doesn't make it in time, and she it's.
Well, he catches her with the web, and there's a crack sound that implies that his web line actually snapped her neck.
Yeah.
And a lot of fans of Gwen Stacy feel like in the mainstream Marvel comics that character was done a disservice by basically being killed off for the sake of motivating a male character, which is a common problem in fiction.
Yep.
So I think a lot of people were excited when this whole idea of Spider-Gwen was introduced.
And they did it well. Once again, it's they didn't just do it to be like, all right, well, you know what, we messed up, here, let's do this, but they picked this character and they did it well.
And in her story, instead of it's Peter Parker who dies, and in that world he actually turns into a villain and becomes that version of the Lizard instead of being a captive of the Green Goblin,
which I saw super cool. That was really neat.
But and it's interesting because it takes you on the same kind of journey of like loss and essentially overcoming that loss, but just through a different perspective. So she was like her part of the movie was actually really good. When she first shows up, I thought that was actually meant to be like the Gwen Stacy of Miles' world.
Okay.
And that then when she shows up as Spider-Woman later, it'd be like, oh no, I'm Gwen Stacy from another Earth.
Right. She wasn't the one that was going to be going side by side with him. Yeah, I was expecting an older Gwen Stacy almost.
Yeah, so they kind of pulled the wool over my eyes there with that little surprise. And they, for a brief period in the comics, they did do like a romance between Spider-Gwen and Miles, and they kind of hint towards that in this a little bit. I'm good either way. I'm happy with them just being friends.
Yeah. No, they're a good pair.
I compare this film to the Lego Batman movie in terms of like the pedigree of the Easter eggs.
Oh my gosh, yeah. They just kept throwing stuff in. Like every other scene or every other location. You mentioned the Alchemax one, which I just did not even notice.
Yeah, so in the comic books of Spider-Man 2099, he works for this company called Alchemax, and it's kind of like this like big, massive corporation that controls a lot of stuff. And in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Alchemax is present. So I'm like, okay, they're already building towards Spider-Man 2099 by the very fact that Alchemax is in this film. Brilliant. But from the very beginning, they have the Comics Code Authority thing pop up. And I found that hysterical because...
You were laughing really hard in the theater. I didn't understand what that was about.
So like... In the 1950s, when comic books were being put under, we'll say, pressure for, like there were U.S. Senate hearings held about the effects of comic books on youth.
Oh my goodness! All right,
and people were claiming that comic books were responsible for juvenile delinquency and immoral behavior. So they essentially the comic book companies,
the video games of the 1950s.
Yes.
All right. Cool. Got it.
So the comic book companies, to keep themselves from going under, they basically created their own censorship board that had to approve every comic book and you couldn't print a comic book without the seal of approval on it.
That's amazing.
So there were like laws, there were rules against using guns, violence, disrespecting authority figures, you name it. The fact that they showed that in there, that was like a fun little Easter egg for...
That's amazing. I love that. That's actually one of my favorite Easter eggs now.
When they do say the line, with great power comes great responsibility, it's the audio of Cliff Robertson playing him in the 2002 Spider-Man movie.
Oh my goodness.
When they reenact the dancing scene from Spider-Man 3, it's the exact same music, and he's doing the exact same moves, just wearing his Spider-Man suit.
Wearing a Spider-Man suit instead of being Tobey Maguire with black hair. That was such a good bit.
Yeah, and like they recreated the train scene, the upside down kiss. Like there were lots of fun little nods and references. Stanley, obviously, he had his cameo in this.
And it was... Okay, so now Stanley, just to put this in perspective, Stanley recorded this before he died.
Yeah.
And his line in the movie is, I'm going to miss him. talking about the Spider-Man who died, and it was so fateful that he passed away this year because we're gonna miss Stan Lee.
Yeah, he's like, he and I were friends, and I was like,
oh my gosh, like it was
double feels.
It was so it's so perfect that it's like, yeah, I'm gonna miss him. We were good friends, me and Spidey. Stanley passes away. We were good friends with Stanley through his works. And then we're going to miss him.
It's like it's a world where Stan Lee's alive and he's mourning Spider-Man. And it's like, but it's the opposite. Spider-Man's well and alive. And it was. And then they added a joke in, which was just hilarious.
Yeah. No,
bring it back if it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
No returns.
No returns. That was good.
But I noticed at one point, Miles' dad is scrolling through his phone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's showing you all his contacts. And among his contacts are Steve Ditko, who was the co-creator of Spider-Man.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And when Miles is going through his contacts, you see Brian Michael Bendis and Sarah Pacelli, who are the writer and artist who created him.
That's amazing.
So there's all those kind of fun little references. Apparently at one point, I had to watch an Easter egg video because I didn't notice this, but at one point they drive by a billboard that says Perry Joe.
Okay.
Which is a reference to Joe Perry of Aerosmith because he did the theme song for the
Spider-Man.
90s Spider-Man.
Oh my gosh.
And again, this is why I have to watch the movie again because I missed a lot of these things because there's just so much happening in the film itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so as soon as they said the word Alchemax, I'm like, oh boy, we're building towards
2099.
Spider-Man 2099. And then we're sitting there watching for the end credit scene. I'm like, I was explaining to you what Alchemax was, and he's like, oh, so they're setting this up. I'm like, yeah, they probably will. And then sure enough, the post-credit scene, quite literally of Lila, who is the Spider-Man of 2099's virtual assistant. And then you actually see him, Spider-Man 2099 in his costume. And I have a painting in our studio, not right there, but over by the door, of Spider-Man 2099 because I love the look. I think it's a great concept. Was really happy. And he was played by Oscar Isaac.
Who's that?
He's Poe Dameron in Star Wars.
Oh, okay. Nice.
He was Apocalypse in X-Men Apocalypse.
Yeah, no, it was a ton of fun. And they throw him back into, I think you guys have seen the meme, but it's basically Spider-Man showing out. It's like when you find the person who's been ruining your life for the past couple of years, and it's a Spider-Man pointing at another Spider-Man.
So it was hilarious because I've seen that episode of the 60s series. Mm-hmm. And it's about a person impersonating Spider-Man, but they recreate that meme as a post-credit scene. And they even have, at one point in the movie, Spider-Man sitting at a desk.
Yep.
And, that was recreating that meme. So Easter eggs were top-notch in references to memes. I noticed that there was a scene in the trailer where Peter B. Parker is talking to Miles, and he says, don't think about saving everyone. Think about saving one person. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, this is literally the exact piece of dialogue from the Justice League movie where, Batman's talking to the Flash.
Right.
And I was like, I get it's the same kind of dynamic, grizzled veteran teaching new person, but to have a line of dialogue so similar, I was like, this is kind of lame. But it's not in the movie.
Yeah.
So not an issue.
It just all worked out.
This movie will probably do well enough to get a sequel.
Yes.
So would you want to see a sequel?
I would love it. I would love it if Madam Web showed up. That would be so cool.
Are there any alternate versions of Spider-Man that you're aware of? That
Iron Spider. Iron Spider is just, I love tech or a steampunk Spider-Man. Either one of those I'd be super happy with.
Okay, the one I'm going to campaign for is Spider-Girl.
Okay.
Her name is May Parker.
Okay.
She's from a world where Spider-Man basically kind of retired because he lost a leg fighting the Green Goblin. And so in this world, he and Mary Jane have a baby. And when this baby becomes a teenager, she starts to develop spider powers.
Right.
So she finds out that her dad was Spider-Man, and so she basically takes over the family business and is Spider-Girl in her universe.
Super cool. I'd love that.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that she finds a way into this. Mm. But yes, coming around to final thoughts, I never know when we start these episodes how I'm going to rate the movies. So
can I start?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm giving it a 3.9.
3.9?
I have never laughed this hard. I was thinking back to the movies I've watched this year. This has been one of my favorite movies I've seen this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I would agree with a lot of what you said, but I can't go. I think I'll go 3.7.
That's fair.
Which is still, I think, one of the highest scores I've given a movie this year. So that says a lot.
Yeah.
But if we've said everything we need to say, go see this film. If you are,
it's a no-brainer. It's just so enjoyable and so solid that you're going to come away with it being happy with your choice.
So Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is now in theaters. go check it out. It's time to go into the bat jar and look at our mail.
All right. Clink it around in there.
We have an email from our good friend Cackles.
All right, Cackles. Hello there. Welcome to an email from Cackles. I'm your host, Cackles, and today I have a little gift for you for the Bat Jar podcast. I'm so sorry that I've been absent for sending you guys messages. It's been a little crazy here with getting engaged. Ooh, I heard that Rob Cakel was engaged too. This isn't a race, Rob. You don't have to do things just because I do too, but I guess I'm happy for you. Anyways, one of the reasons why you haven't heard from me recently is because I've been in Cackle's studio doing some mixing and matching, and this little ditty came out. So I hope you guys enjoy it.
So we're going to play for you this audio file that Cackles made for us.
And it is a Bat Jar intro.
Yeah, so you haven't heard this yet either, have you?
I have not. I'm excited.
This is the Bat Jar. This is the Bat Jar. This is the Bat Jar podcast. Movies, TV, manga, comic books, or is that graphic novels, cartoons, oops, that's animation, Disney, Star Wars, Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and Digimon, and Mighty Morphin, Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Nintendo, Cinematic Universes, Marvel, DC, Justice League, it's Batman, Leagues with Superman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Avengers, Iron Man, Captain Flash, Loki, Spider-Man, and Hulk, and Logan, X-Men, Battlers, Allen, Galaxy Guardians, Star Trek, Trick, Card, and Janeway, Nerds and Geeks come gather around, join them in the Big Bat Jar, Faber Joe and Pixel Patch, they peek under the microscope.
That is the best gift ever. Merry Christmas to us from you, Cackles. That was awesome. For you guys who didn't catch it, it is the 90s Batman theme.
No, it's the 60s.
Well, 60s.
It's a bit of the Danny Elfman Batman music at the beginning, and then it goes into the 60s series.
Yeah, of the Batman theme done for the Bat Jar podcast.
And there's a PS here.
PS. Also really sad that Asian John had to leave. Gonna miss his trolley spirit. Rest in peace, my friend. Wait, is he dead? Oh, wait, you didn't tell me that Asian John died. You've done your podcast proud no matter what Pixel Patch or anyone else says. I think you're the best. Don't you forget that. Here's a little something I've of. Do not stand in my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I'm 1,000 winds that blow. I'm the diamond glint on the snow. I keep thinking that he thinks that Asian John is dead. Now, Asian John is well and alive. He's just moved on to other things.
Yes.
Oh, God.
But Cackles, we'd love to have you back sometime. So get your butt back up to the city.
Yep.
And I played this once before just because I'm not good at live reactions to things. But I was blown away. Like that seems like it took a lot of effort and creativity into making that. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. So if you want to contact the show with a question or idea for an episode, you can send us an email to
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or like those pretty blue birds, you can tweet us at
the Bat Cookie Jar.
We're also available on Apple Podcast and the one I forget?
iHeartRadio.
There we go. Google Play Music. That's the one I use. I love it. I love it so much.
Because of the colors?
It's pretty colors. All right? That's how I live my life. Stitcher Radio, Spotify, also pretty colors. SoundCloud, once again. Or wherever you get your podcasts. So share the post on Facebook. That really helps us, get to more people, more or less. Make sure to like our page because, well, one, it'll show up more often and you'll know when we release a new episode. And we want everyone to join us.
Inside the internet.
Inside the internet jar.
We're going to be taking a few weeks off for Christmas.
Yep.
We'll be back January 5th or 6th or 7th maybe.
With a new year for your new ears.
Yeah. So
those of you who have children.
We'll be talking about Aquaman then because that'll be like the last comic book film of 2018.
And it will not be a 1-hour segment on Jason Momoa's pecs, but I will mention them right now. Okay, that's it. No more.
Okay. So on behalf of the podcast, we want to wish everyone Merry Christmas.
A very Merry Christmas.
If you celebrate Kwanzaa, Happy Kwanzaa.
Happy Hanukkah.
Well, Hanukkah's done.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope you guys have had.
Yes. Yes. So anyway, Merry Christmas, and we'll see you guys in 2019. And until that time, in 2019, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Pixel Patch.
Catch you on the flip side.
1 pixel at a time.